On November 15th, the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan reaffirmed the spirit of Camp David during the APEC summit. However, with leadership changes on the horizon in both Japan and the U.S., there is speculation that the U.S.-Japan alliance and trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan may evolve into a new framework. To take a closer look at this issue, we are joined in the studio by Professor Erik Mobrand, who specializes in East Asian politics at Seoul National University's Graduate School of International Studies. Professor Mobrand, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, so let's first talk about U.S.-Japan relations. It's been known that the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was the foreign leader that President Trump most frequently met during his terms. So considering the personalities of President Trump and also Prime Minister Ishiba, do you think they can build similar bond together?
Trump and Abe had some rapport, didn't they? I think, though, it's not so much a matter of personality. The United States and Japan are allies after all, and they're going to remain so. I think their relationship will be close, regardless of who is the president in the United States or the prime minister in Japan. Furthermore, I think that we have some similarities between Biden and Trump in the way that they approach their allies in this part of the world. There has emerged a tendency to look at South Korea and Japan through the lens of China skepticism. Yes. We've seen this both with Biden and with Trump. There is an understanding, I think, in Washington that, there's a decision that China is a rival to the United States, and there's an assumption that South Korea and Japan share concerns about China with the United States. So I think we can expect some continuity in terms of a close relationship between Washington and Tokyo. My own hope would be that there would be some questioning of the assumption in Washington about the perceptions that South Korea and Japan have of China. The viewpoint from this part of the world is, after all, a bit different than it is from the United States. The economy, for example, is different. South Korea's economy relates in a particular way to China's economy that's not the same as the way that the United States economy relates to China. And so I would hope there would be some consideration of the different expectations and perspectives we have in South Korea and Japan about China as this relationship in the new administrations forms.
Yes, but still there seems to be some anxiety about potential change. Obviously, during the Biden administration, the U.S. has been facilitating all the unilateral cooperation in this region, and Japan obviously has played a key role in this regard. However, President-elect Trump prefers bilateral cooperation rather than multilateral cooperation. So will that have any impact on Japan's role in this region?
There could be some impact. The different style that Trump has to international affairs from Biden or many other figures in the United States could have some impact. My sense, though, is there is not quite as much at stake in the security relationship in East Asia in relation to that particular partnership between the United States and Japan compared to other sorts of factors. I think there are other sources of change that could bring more acute or deeper problems. These would include things like, what is the purpose of having American forces in Korea? Historically, we've known that the purpose is about defending South Korea against any aggression from North Korea. But there are increasing questions about, is it actually partly to defend against possible expansion from China? If so, there are relatively large implications for the United States' security relationship with South Korea and with this region. There are other big sources of possible change in the security landscape as well. Another would be the possibility that conflicts or tension in other parts of the world spills over to the Korean Peninsula. We can think about the Taiwan Strait. What happens if there is conflict there? That will have big implications for South Korea. We have no clarity as of now on where U.S. forces in Korea go if there is a conflict on the Taiwan Strait. And again, that has an impact on South Korea's defense situation. And now, with the possibility of North Korean troops in Russia's war in Ukraine, this suggests a possible linkage between that conflict and inter-Korean relations. So I think there are a number of these possible sources of really serious change in the security landscape in East Asia. And I think that ongoing discussions between Japan and the US with Seoul play a rather minor role compared to some of these other factors.
Now that you talk about security cooperation and military posture in this region, let me ask you this, because it was reported that the Prime Minister Ishiba mentioned Asian version of NATO, but considering President-elect Trump's preference of bilateral relations and his skepticism about alliance systems like NATO, well, people are questioning about the feasibility of this idea. What's your perspective?
It's a big idea, isn't it? Since the middle of the 20th century, we've had these separate security arrangements for the United States on the Atlantic versus on the Pacific. We get the collective security agreements on the Atlantic, and then we have these bilateral alliances on the Pacific. So suggesting a shift to a collective agreement like NATO would signal a major historic change. It's true, Trump likes to play down multilateralism. He prefers the one-on-one negotiation. I would point out that also fits within a larger, rather unfortunate trend, actually, of multilateralism declining globally, of the US role in multilateral institutions such as the United Nations also declining. So I think it's not all down to the prior Trump administration and the upcoming one. At the same time, during that first Trump administration, we had new ways of talking about American partners in this region. There was a surge in discussion of Indo-Pacific. And the Indo-Pacific imaginary of this region does put countries together into a kind of collective, at least rhetorically. So there is a kind of multilateral way of thinking about this region, even if there are not the kinds of institutions to support it from the Trump perspective. All of that said, I think it would be a major historic leap to go from these bilateral alliances to some multilateral alliance system. I see very few benefits for many of the individual partners, and I think there would also be a lot of resistance at a social level in particular countries. So I'm skeptical that something would come of this sort of initiative.
Yeah, of course. Actually, one of the serious issues debated in South Korea is obviously cost sharing these days after the election in November. So there are concerns among South Koreans about the increase of demands from the U.S. And also, Japan is contributing to stationing of U.S. forces on its soil. So I'm just wondering if there's any similar concerns within the Japanese society about the demands in cost sharing from the U.S.
This is certainly an important issue. I think, given how Trump has spoken in the past and more recently, I think it is reasonable to expect the possibility that his administration would raise the question of greater cost sharing with Japan or with South Korea on those countries' own defenses. And I think this raises very serious questions for each of these countries. For South Korea, would this pose some vulnerabilities to South Korean defense? Or is it in some way an opportunity to have greater discretion over how the country devises its defense strategy? How do we deal with the nuclear umbrella? How do we deter North Korea? There are really profound questions that emerge once we're faced with this question. So I expect that in the coming weeks, we will see a lot more debate within South Korea, within Japan as well, on this question, because these countries need to be prepared in the event that there are requests for greater cost sharing.
I'm sure we are on the same page on that regard. Of course, then there is another issue, trilateral cooperation between the U.S., Japan, and South Korea. Actually, Camp David framework has been the cornerstone of trilateral cooperation, but there are also skepticism about the future of this framework. Do you think these framework will be revisited or fundamentally re-examined by the Trump administration?
My guess would be that the next Trump administration will review all aspects of foreign policy, including the Camp David framework. So I think, yes, we can expect a review of that approach. We don't know what will come from that review. I think there's no reason to assume that it will be abandoned, but I think it is reasonable to expect that there will be a rethinking of that, yes.
Then let's talk about personal relations between the leaders in Japan and South Korea. It's been said that President Yoon and former Prime Minister Kishida met 12 times personally. So how do you envision the personal relations between President Yoon and Prime Minister Ishiba in the coming months and years?
Again, I would be rather doubtful that these sorts of relationships come down to personality. I think we have every indication from Seoul that the current administration here is keen on hearing what Tokyo has to say on a variety of matters. And so I anticipate that there will be continued trips and consultations with Japan.
Yeah, of course. And I'm also curious about Japan's position on North Korea. There has been reports about Japan's engagement with North Korea in the coming months. So, and President-elect Trump also mentioned re-engagement with North Korea as well. So there can be, well, very interesting moment where all the leaders will meet the leader of North Korea soon. So could Prime Minister Ishiba will consider meeting with Kim Jong-un, leader of North Korea, and he may have some, momentum if President-elect Trump re-engages with North Korea. After all,
it's a moment with lots of tensions, both on the peninsula in terms of U.S.-China rivalry, with the Russian war in Ukraine, and now Korean Peninsula linkages to that. It's a tough time for negotiations. That said, I think there is some possibility that the United States and Japan would take the lead on trying to open up negotiations or some sort of discussion with Pyongyang. South Korea has been focused elsewhere recently. The focus has been more on making threats to North Korea rather than finding a pathway toward peace. So I think there is a real possibility that we could see Japan and the United States taking a lead in shaping inter-Korean relations. My own view is that's a bit of a pity for South Korea. I think we would hope that South Korea would play a leading role in shaping inter-Korean affairs. For the moment, it looks like South Korea is a little bit on the sidelines of those possible future discussions.
Then what kind of issue that should be discussed between North Korea and Japan if there is any meeting between the two leaders?
If Japan is interested in having dialogue with North Korea, and I think the calculation is a bit different given the changed domestic political situation in Japan relative to some months ago. But if there is a real interest in Japan in holding some sort of discussion with North Korea, then it needs to be as open as possible. If it starts with conditions about denuclearization, then it is unlikely to go anywhere. If it starts with conditions about dealing with abductees, then it goes nowhere. So if there is a real interest in leading to a different situation, then I think it's going to need to be a rather open conversation with a goal toward achieving some sort of stability in the area.
So, okay, thank you very much for your insights. With the recent leadership change in the U.S. and Japan, it remains to be seen whether trilateral cooperation between U.S., Japan, and South Korea will evolve. However, we hope to have a strong bond between the three countries in the coming years. Thank you for your time. Let's wrap up today.
Thanks so much for having me.